city.
Thank you. Could you reach over and push the button to turn that mic off? Thank you, Eva. Yes, sir.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Odain White. I'm from Harvard Job Corps. I have a question. It would take coordinated efforts by our elected official in this state to fix the problem, but it's not rocket science. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what policies should be put in place to solve the problem. And our elected official in this state should make more efforts to solve the problem, and that's what I want, and many of the citizens in this state want, at least. Thank you.
So I agree with you that it's not rocket science, but there's a reason why I spent a number of years as an activist. It's not about whether it's rocket science or not. It's about whether, one of the things that Maya has talked about, and I think many of us who've done this type of work for years, is power in the community, leadership within the community. And that's what it's about. It's about whether or not you can push elected officials to pick up your agenda. And when you say that that's what the people want, I know that's what the people want. But I think when we say we want something, we have to want it enough to act upon it. And act upon it in a way that we push those who have the power to change what policy is to move in our direction. And that's where I think a lot of times we don't do such a good job. So I'm encouraged that you're thinking about this, particularly because you're a younger person. Because I hope what that thinking does is get you to understand that you have to be one of the people who now goes out to your network and gets your network to understand that as a collective you need to be pushing upon people like myself. And again, this is why I've now come to encourage young people who understand this, who perhaps have experienced the opposite side of the spectrum where things aren't great, to get involved in a way that they're not just pushing, but that eventually they become part of the group that makes policy. So again, I agree with you. It's not rocket science, but there is an effort that needs to happen that does not happen on the part of a larger part of our community.
I think both points are really important, and one of the things I wanted to lift up is that in the state of Connecticut, by 2020, and this really relates to both comments, by 2020, half of all people aged 25 to 29 will not be white. Half. Half. At the same time, we're highly separated from one another, right? And one of the things that needs to drive, because of the way our democracy works, and it's the way it's supposed to work, is elected officials are supposed to pay attention to their constituents. Well, if constituents in West Hartford are refusing some of the solutions that would build more opportunity, then the elected officials are actually doing their job by doing bad policy. And the way to fix that, I mean, obviously, hopefully electeds will also help lead their constituents in terms of their information and knowledge. But one of the things that needs to happen, I think, is youth of color and white youth need to start being in relationship. Because for those kids who I had the privilege of hanging out with in West Hartford when I was in middle school and high school and really enjoyed and had a good time with, we were having conversations I don't think they would have had if I hadn't been visiting. Right? And I believe to this day that that had an impact on them.
Like what?
Like, for instance, how different their schools looked from the schools that were in the neighborhood I grew up in, and what that meant. I mean, they were in public schools, right? It was a public school, and yet it was a private school to me. I was like, y'all in private school? And they're like, no, we're in public school. It's like, no, y'all in private school. And having that conversation about the vast differences in experience, because when you are in a school that is monolithic, you don't know the experience of people who are in a very, very different environment. And those not understanding each other's circumstances is what leads us to make bad decisions.
So I was actually glad to hear Maya bring out that statistic, because it's one that I'm always continuously hammering away about. I think it's useful. So if you want to move policy, sometimes I think I came to the world of policy, and I think many of us come to the world of policy kind of hoping that people just kind of get it, or that they're just good, or, you know, all of these ideals that we have about the way people should be. But statistics and information is important too. And so when you have information like that comes from things like New England 2020 and several other reports that are 8, 9 years old now, what we know is that people are concerned about where they are and what is happening where they are. And these people who are elected to represent all people, who are really doing the work I think that they're allowed to do, become much more aware of the need for them to think about communities outside of the community in which they exist when we're talking about what happens to them where they are. And when you have a statistic like that, you can't have a state like Connecticut where we're talking about, and have been talking about, science, technology, engineering, and math like the rest of the country, and have black, Hispanic, and poor white people unable to do 3rd, 4th, 5th grade math. The two just don't go together. And so when you and your friends get together and start talking about what you're going to do and how you're going to push, I think what you'll find is an audience that's a little more receptive, because if they don't fix this problem, you have a state that cannot function. And I will say this, it is actually an emergency, because the group that we're talking about, being 25 at about the youngest in the year 2020, which is 8 years from now, are 17 right now. So you almost can't fix that problem. And so if people are coming to elected officials talking to them about this in a way where they understand the underlying information and push that, you can create a sense of emergency in a group that never had that sense of emergency before, and thereby help to move policy.
Teresa.